Good morning. I'm Julie Hodges. I'm the Helen Jones Endowed Director of Education here at the National Ranching Heritage Center. I'm excited to go along on this tour today and show you guys the history of ranching as we move through our historical park. We have this beautiful park here at the center that's almost 20 acres big with 53 historic structures in it that show a time frame from 1780 to the modern day. So we're going to go out, take a look, and you'll see through the architecture and through some of the stories we'll share today how the ranching industry developed, and we'll also throw in how it continues to thrive here today. We'll also have a beautiful landscape to look at. So part of the ranching story is grassland. Ranchers are grass farmers when it comes down to it. So let's get started.
And another thing that we can do is, if you let me sit in the front,
okay,
and then I can also repeat some of the key things you're saying.
So this is Los Corlitos, located just 4 miles north of the Grand River, and it was established. So it's very simple, and with what they were able to ship over, and really carve from hand to use as furniture, and what they needed for daily living.
And again, I think it's important to emphasize that every single building you're going to look at is an original building that was painstakingly brought back to this location, brick by brick, stone by stone, and recreated, rebuilt in this location. That's for every building you're going to see except for the barn.
Yeah. Part of the barn, and actually this one is a reproduction.
Well, then I just lied to you.
They did discover that the family had used the floor of the original building as a burial ground. And so we did not want to disturb that. But yes, all the rest of the of the structure you'll see today are original. And so they've physically been moved from their original locations here to Lubbock.
All right.
So might show the small outdoor wood stove. So all the kids that come and visit us here at the Ranching Heritage Center always think, "Oh, that's the doghouse," but it actually is an outdoor oven called an Orno. Y'all may see similar structures in Africa as well. All right. Julie talked about, how we feature grass. So throughout the park here at the Ranching Heritage Center, we feature different types of grasses, the native grasses that grow on the Great Plains, because it really was that grazing infrastructure that, the buffalo used for thousands of years that really make ranching possible here on the Great Plains.
All right. So obviously, we're going to get back on the mule, which is loud, but obviously we won't stop the mule anytime we're going to talk. So hang on, folks.
So as we move through the historical timeline, we started in the 1780s, and now we're going to move up to the Republic of Texas era. So if you didn't know, Texas at one time was its own country. They fought a battle, fought a war with Mexico that we were under their flag, and we fought a battle for independence. Texas became its own country until it was actually annexed into the United States in the mid 1840s. But this log cabin was built during that Republic of Texas era. It's called El Capote Cabin. It was built in South Texas. You can see that the majority of the logs were built out of native wood. Many of these are pecan tree logs. But it is a very simple structure, but it's symbolic of almost log cabins that have been built all over the world for us to live in. So obviously is a simple one-room structure. This one was, as it was reconstructed, it was disassembled log by log. All of the logs were mapped and numbered, and then it was rebuilt here at the Ranching Heritage Center. This structure has actually been here since the 1970s. So it's been here a considerable amount of time, but it was actually lived in up until the mid 1930s.
Wow. And a lot of the structures we're going to look at had just simple swept dirt floors.
Yes. So they would pack those and stamp them as tight as they could, but it is just a dirt floor. You'll notice that these berms that we'll be featuring as we go throughout the park are built up. This was all flat land, and so the berms were actually built so that you don't feel like you're actually in the middle of Lubbock, Texas, which is very flat terrain. But it really gives the park a sense of place, and so you don't feel like you're just right in the middle of a city. We're going to go now to Hedwig's Hill. Hedwig's Hill was built in Central Texas, and it served many different purposes during its lifetime. You'll notice in the back that there was actually these rock structures that were the original portion of the home, but then they added on to the log structure in front. So there's a storage area. There's actually 2 bedrooms and a kitchen and eating area that the family used. Again, in this storage area, you just have a packed dirt floor where we have wood floors in the other sections. Simple, hand implements. Some of them would have been just powered by the people that lived here, in addition to, horse and mule drawn implements as well. But it features this breezeway. Hopefully you'll be able to see that drew the air between the 2 main portions of the cabin, and that just provided cooling. Central Texas is very hot and humid, and so that provided a lot of cooling for the families. And a lot of times they actually slept in this dog trot, we call it, and to be more comfortable at night.
So why was this called a dog trot?
Yeah, that just was the name that developed, that described this breezeway. It's just far back as we can research, it's been called a dog. But you'll see that as they were able to ship things out by wagon and later by railroad, they did have manufactured furniture, especially chairs. That was one of the more popular things that was sent out, were and tables, as well as crockery and lamps. But those were all oil burning lamps, wood burning fireplaces that were used for heat. But you begin to see how people developed on the frontier as part of the ranching lifestyle.
I'm going to get a quick shot over here in the bedroom. And you can see some of the furniture he talked about. and the nightstand, the bed, the chair, the dresser. These were pre-made articles that they brought in with them.
All shipped by wagon from what would have been the main part of the United States at that time.
And a similar type bedroom.
Took your spot.
Goodbye.
So as we continue through the timeline, we start to see the architecture change a little bit. We'll stop here at the Joel House, and we'll talk about it in just a minute, but it's actually a rock structure. They had two homes that were burned by Native Americans as they progressed onto the frontier. And so they actually sent out for a stonemason to come from Fort Worth, which was the nearest town, and actually built this rock structure that obviously was much more difficult to burn. But many tons of stone are located in this structure. It is 2 stories. And so the family was able to have basically their living space on the downstairs, where they were able to cook, they ate, lived life, and then slept upstairs in this structure. I want to show you quickly the spring house. So one of the early forms of cooling and refrigeration was to actually run water through the channels located inside the spring house. And then you place eggs and butter and cream, milk, anything that was perishable, was placed in crocks within those channels. And so that was able to preserve food and keep it for long periods of time. But obviously meat and other items would have been hung in here as well.
All right, so I see several of you have talked about the audio quality. We will come up with something else for the future. We're going to continue with this right now. As you can see, this is the Ranching Heritage Center, houses all kinds of educational programs. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Pretty good. Going one. Yeah. Yeah. So as we continue on to the historical timeline, we're now getting up into the early 1900s. And so, but folks were venturing out into the treeless plains. And so the Great Plains of the United States are essentially just vast grasslands. There's very little trees, very little topography. And so very often people would live in holes they dug in the ground. And so we call those dugouts. Sometimes they were just built into the side of a hill, but this one actually was an actual hole that was built into the ground, and then they would put rafters or timbers that they would cut down along a creek, and then put sod, dirt on top of that. And this is where people lived. So in this case, the ranch manager lived here, but his wife refused to live with him in a hole in the ground. And so he eventually was able to get enough lumber that he built the cabin up above us And so his wife would actually come and join him and live with him.
So I just wanted to mention to all of you that this is actually my favorite house, just because it really does an amazing job of showing how they lived underground, because it made such a difference in cooling. And some of you who may have done some camping or been in similar type structures know exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, it just, you also live with everything that lived below ground. So critters, yes. So you might be waking up to a snake on occasion.
As long as it's not a rattlesnake, I'm okay with that. Rattlesnakes are very, very venomous snakes that live in West Texas. I wouldn't call them common, but they are not uncommon either in West Texas. All right, moving on to the next one.
So you can see that, as Michael pointed out, that we have lots of school children visiting today. We have between 6,000 and 8,000 school kids that visit each year. So it's just a great chance for us to teach about how important ranching was to the history of Texas and the United States and of the world, in addition to how important ranching still remains today. Because for us to produce beef at significant levels, we continue to need ranches and have to continue doing that. So, tell you what, we'll step out for just a second, Michael, and we may walk just a minute that may enable us to feature things. I want to show you our schoolhouse. And so this was a simple one-room schoolhouse that was actually originally built on skids. And so ranchers would pull the schoolhouse so that it was at the closest place that the greatest number of kids could actually come to school. But as you can see, it's a one-room schoolhouse. All of the kids from every grade, from kindergarten up until probably 8th, 9th, 10th grade, would have been in the same school with one teacher. But this is where they learn to read and write and do arithmetic, and be able to learn.
So something that we often talk about when we talk about that time period is they wanted to learn the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Yes.
We need to work on our grammar a little bit.
Right. So but one thing I do want to point out, is 3 major things contributed to ranching here on the Great Plains. Because before those 3 things came together, it was a very inhospitable place.
I just saw a great question here. Andre was asking, how would they arrange classes for students from different levels in one room?
So the teacher would just adjust her lessons, so the upper, or older kids would have certain lessons that they would work on. The younger kids would, so she basically split them into groups, but taught them, on different, grade levels, but all in one room. So great question. But it was really 3 things that enabled ranching to exist on the Great Plains. There was very little water out here, although there were millions of acres of grass. And so the windmill that is able to pump, and we have a windmill right over here to our left, Michael. So that windmill uses wind power to pump water from deep below the ground, and bring it to the surface for both human consumption as well as the cattle and livestock that were housed on that property. So the windmill was critical. The other thing was the railroad, because as the railroad came west, it enabled goods and services to be brought out. So especially we've seen, the siding buildings that have wood siding. That was enabled because the railroad was able to ship that lumber out. And then it was barbed wire that enabled you to actually fence in your own property and make ranching possible at that scale.
One of the questions
Hey, Michael?
was, what was the item in the middle of the room? And I think they're referring to the black sort of bulbous piece. And those were stoves for warmth. And they would burn anything from wood to cow chips, cow patties. And one of the things that sometimes children, school-age children would have to do is they would have to go out onto the plains and actually collect cow chips or dried cow patties and burn them.
Yeah.
And yes, you heard me correctly.
In fact, we even have a cow chip house that its whole purpose was for the kids to go out on the ranch and take in cow chips and actually store them, and then they burn them in the winter for warmth and for food and everything else that we would burn something for. So cow chips. But this white structure in front of us, this actually is one we can go walk through. This is called the Helens Hill. But it kind of shows how ranching developed over time. So there's this small wood shingle structure on the left side of your screen. That was the original home. So it was just a one-room structure. But as the ranch became, more profitable, as they were able to bring things out from the east and ship it out on the railroad, then they added on to the home. And so it eventually became a really comfortable, nice ranch property. I think they had 5 kids, but it just shows the evolution of how ranching developed over time.
This structure right here was the original part, and then all of this was built as the ranch became more and more successful. Excellent.
So this might be a good one. We can see how the furniture and furnishings was able to be changed as they became more affluent and earned money. So you were able to actually bring out, dining room tables that were shipped on the railroad, but then they still might have to be carried in a wagon for a week-long trip to get it out all the way to the ranch. So it was still a huge undertaking to get things from the east. But you'll notice that these ranchers had a phonograph player, and so they were actually able to have records playing. As that technology developed, they began to have chandeliers where they had lighting that actually hung from the ceiling. So it just, it showed the development of how things increased as the railroad and ranching became more successful.
And this is a foot-powered, foot-pedaled sewing machine.
Hey, Michael,
Yes, Maria.
can you repeat the 3 things that made ranching easier?
3 things critical to ranching.
So the 3 things that were critical to ranching were windmills to provide water, the railroad that shipped goods, stock and cattle back east, and barbed wire. And that was enabled you to actually fence in your own land and be able to make a success of ranching.
Now, one of the things that you're going to learn more about is barbed wire. One of the things that Kat and I were able to do is go up to Polidoro and film Texas the Musical. And in that, it's going to be a little reverse of this. We were sitting far back, and so we weren't able to zoom in, but you had direct audio line from the actual production. And that's something that is very, very prominently figured in that musical is a discussion of barbed wire and fencing.
I think that's walk. Right. This just gives us a great opportunity to see different structures. So this direction, we have the 80 John house. 80 John was one of the most successful Black ranchers in Texas and went to work for the 80 Ranch, but then began buying his own cattle, began buying his own land. And they actually discovered oil on his property in the 1930s. And so he actually, did very well. But one of the things you'll notice is there's a porch on all 4 corners of this structure. So you can always have shade and always have a breeze. I thought that was really very, very clever, great architecture. It is new.
I've never seen this structure before.
So
This is a church.
this is a church, and so faith was an important part of most ranching communities. So most, ranching communities would have had a school. They had a church. They would have had a general store, but a church was an important part of it. This church was built in Spur, Texas, on land that was donated by the Spur Ranch, and we moved it here this last fall just to represent the importance that faith has had, or did have in the ranching community and culture.
So another great question, Andre. You got some great questions, Andre. Keep them coming. So he asked the black farmer that found oil on his land.
Yes.
Was he compensated for that oil?
Yes. He, in fact, he died a millionaire, and then left much of that oil, inheritance to his family. Actually, interestingly enough, so now we're going to look at our Victorian mansion. And so this structure is called the Barton House. And so Joseph Barton built this house. We're actually in the middle of repainting it. But to be the center of a town site called Barton Site. He named it after himself. But this really shows, as ranchers became more affluent. But interestingly enough, he built it on where he thought the railroad was going to come through, and then the railroad went through a different community. And so within a couple of years, Barton Site, went away. Everybody moved to the new town.
So to answer another question I saw, generally the policy is if anything is discovered on land where you own the property and the mineral and water rights, you control what comes out of that property. If it's gold, if it's oil, if it's water, you control the property rights. There is something in the United States called eminent domain, where in a very few occasions, the government can say, hey, we absolutely have to have this property for the betterment of the community, say if they're building a railroad or something along those lines. And in those cases, the government has to compensate the owner. So, and that policy is still the same today.
Very good. So, but you can just see we've gone all the way from a hole in the ground to a mansion. And so, not every rancher did that, but a few did. So,
All right. Well, look, our ride has found us.
yes.
I know we're starting to run out of time, but I can't wait for you guys to see the collection in the barn, which is a collection of barbed wire, and they would actually have very distinctive barbed wire patterns and very distinctive brands. So that's something to look forward to.
Yeah, so we're going to walk back over. So this white structure in front of me is called the Matador Office. And so the Matador Office, we actually saw one of the dugouts on the other side. So this ranch did start off as a dugout in the side of a hill. But the ranch actually got investors from Scotland that began to develop it. They put their money into the ranch, and then they built this office, and they sent their own bookkeeper to actually keep all of the books. But as we look in this structure here at the Matador Office, you'll see that they kept immaculate ledgers. They kept track of every expense on the ranch. So they ran it very much like a business. I mean, it was a business. It was intended to make money. And so the ranch manager and the accountant worked all the time to ensure that this ranch was a success. This ranch was established in the 1870s, and it still exists today. So the Matador Ranch is still in existence and in production to this very day.
So to answer a couple of questions I saw pop up, as far as compensation, generally compensation was tried to set at current market value. And while current market value was something that could occasionally be disputed and haggle back and forth, it was usually pretty close. The other question was, why were there distinctive brand or distinctive patterns of barbed wire was because if remember, there was no GPS back then. There was no global positioning system. There was no Google Maps. So if you were literally riding a horse through the plain and you came upon a fence and you knew the patterns of barbed wire, you knew exactly whose property you were coming up on.
Yeah, and there was also, many different types of barbed wire that were developed over time. So we can look through some of the more popular ones, but just like with any invention, many times you have an original invention, and then you have lots of copycats. And so many people came around and copied, or developed what they thought was their own better improvement on barbed wire. Interestingly enough, this one, Joseph Glidden's 3-line right twist barbed wire that was developed in 1874 is still the predominant type of barbed wire that's used today all around the world. And so it was one of the original ones that was developed, and actually one of the most successful. But there were different types that developed. Some that had these big panels. Some had extremely large barbs. Some were built more for hogs and sheep and goats. But the majority were actually developed for containing cattle. So let's go on in. So the building we're in is the 4-6's barn. And the 4-6's is one of the most famous ranches anywhere in the world. It was owned by the same family from 1880 until just recently, and it's sold. But it's one of the most famous brands, the 4-6's. That is actually a very aggressive barbed wire. But we talked about identifying ranches and identifying cattle. And so one of the main ways we do that is with branding irons. And so branding actually began probably in Egypt over 2,000 years ago. It's been used all across the world, but it's still the most effective way by actually burning a mark onto the animal's hide. We're able to then permanently identify who that animal belongs to. And so these branding irons were donated by ranches all across the West. This is an FEE, but the branding iron, helps identify that range. But it's also, here comes some of our kids. But it also is a kind of a coat of arms. It is the trademark for that ranch. And so a great amount of pride is taken in the brands and continuing to be able to keep that brand.
Howdy. And as you can see, in the Southwest, there were simply dozens upon dozens upon dozens upon dozens of different brands just in this area. Were there specific mechanized manufacturing of barbed wire, or was it all manual?
No, it became industrialized fairly quickly. And so there were Joseph Glidden. He actually was from Illinois, and his manufacturing plant was in Illinois. But the importance of the railroad was that they were shipping all of that barbed wire and other goods here to the West from the Midwest and back east. So yes, it became industrialized fairly early.
I'm going to get outside so you're close to the mic. I'm actually going to come over here so that he's close to the mic.
Yeah, let's go there. And we had great attendance for a Tuesday. I love it. So I wanted to show you the Pitchfork Ranch Cookhouse. So because so many of the ranches were, far out, away from civilization, in most ranches, even to today, they continue to feed most of their employees at least breakfast and lunch. And so this structure actually was built in 1900. It was used in continuous use until 2010, until it moved here to the Ranching Heritage Center. I used to actually have breakfast in that cookhouse every time I went through the Pitchfork Ranch. And so the Pitchfork, again, is a really important worldwide known brand that has shipped cattle and horses all across the world. It continues to be in existence today. It's owned by a family out of St. Louis, which is in the Midwest of the United States, but continues to operate just about 100 miles east of Lubbock here.
All right, I'm going to show them one thing real quick. For each structure that's here on the property, there's a sign like this. So it shows a picture, an early picture of the house, gives an idea of when the structure was first created, gives a little bit of the history, and then also shows where the structure was originally built as well. So visitors get a lot of information just from the signs. It's Reagan. That's our boss. My goodness, she does not want to be on camera. So what's wonderful is, hello, Mr. Knox. So Reagan has a brand new baby, and she's been out on maternity leave, and I am so excited because she comes back to work Thursday, and she's kind of an awesome boss. So I'm ready for her to come back. Okay, so someone asked about the vegetation that we're seeing. Is it all native to Lubbock, or is it mostly native to the Southwest? The answer is a little bit of both.
It is a little bit of both. So, like in many places, we have a little bit of a mix of native grasses that would have been, here on the original prairie. We've actually tried to purpose.
So the ask is irrigated. Yes, a lot of this is irrigated.
We get about 18 inches of rain a year. And so we have to manage our livestock to handle that. But ranches in this area tend to be very large. So I mentioned the 4.6s. It is 184,000 acres. And so, it's a very large. The King Ranch, that's a very famous ranch in South Texas, is larger than the state of Rhode Island. And so we move our livestock across those vast ranges.
All right, Julie, what's up next?
Well, I think that's about it for our tour of the historical park. But since we have a little bit of time, we have time for questions.
Yes.
And we can also go in and check out our cattle breed exhibit if you like.
Let's do it.
All right.
And we'll definitely need you to.
I will use my teacher voice.
There you go. I didn't see that last question.
The last question, did you answer the total population in the area?
Total population of?
It says, what's the total population in this area, current stat?
Okay, so for Lubbock, Texas, we just went through a census where they tried to measure the population. We don't have those numbers back yet, But as of about 10 years ago, we had 250 to 275. We're expected to be very close to 300,000.
And then they said, and the number of animals hosted too.
I actually need you to speak up, Maria. What was that?
Sorry, it says the number of animals hosted too.
The number of animals?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I have no idea. I'm just going to be honest.
I think that's
No idea. There's a lot of what we call critters in the area. In fact,
well. Let
out
me go.
front. What's that?
Let me go back because the original question was, could we please have a glimpse of the animals before you leave, please? So
Yes, I will get a better shot of the animals before we leave.
okay, and then they were asking the number of animals hosted. So I think that was with that question.
So, and the animals that I'll show you are not live animals. They are bronze. They're bronze, right? Bronze cast statues to sort of show some of the animals that are in this area. They have deer, they have rabbit, and out front they have a very beautiful sort of array of bronze cows.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is that several of us, including Kat, Maria, and myself, will often take daily morning walks out through the cow creek.
And other question, were the livestock also affected by diseases? How was the situation handled?
Okay. All right. So one of the questions they had was, were livestock affected by diseases, and how did they handle that?
So yes, livestock are affected by disease. Over time, as technology has changed, we actually breed some cattle to be more disease resistant. So zebu breeds that were brought in from India were actually bred with Angus cattle and other British and European breeds to make them more resilient in tropical environments and help offer them relief from some pests and parasites. We have seen many different things throughout time. We had a screwworm epidemic in the 1920s that decimated cattle populations in the region. And today, along the border of Texas and Mexico, there's a group of men called tick riders, and they actually monitor movement of animals across the border that may bring in ticks that will cause disease in various livestock breeds. Many livestock, of course, are treated for disease preventative treatments such as inoculations for various things as well. So they're monitored very closely and we continue to watch for disease and those things in the livestock industry.
One of the other questions I saw was, how many acres are in the retreat center?
So our site sits on a total of 30 acres on the corner of Texas Tech University campus.
All right. I'm going to walk through this exhibit real quick, and I'm going to try to keep an eye on the screen in case you have questions.
A question that might have been missed is, what's the revolution in disease handling?
So as far as disease, again, what they tried to do, there were some vets that traveled, but at the same time, they actually did a lot of work investing in different types of breeds that were disease resistant. Yes, exactly what we were talking about. How possible is it to crossbreed different animals with African variants? And very, very possible. In fact, I'm going to come over here real quick. As you can see, they tried to interbreed with a variety of different types and species of cow from around the world based on what were resistant to disease, what handled dry climates better than others.
So I guess another interesting aspect on that topic is in Africa, you have, kind of three big climate zones going on. You've got tropical, subtropical, and then subtropics with a large amount of winter rainfall. Texas is very similar in our climate zones. So cattle that would do well in Africa do well in Texas as well because they're adapted to the environment. There are some British breeds, however, that would not fare so well or do not fare so well here without a lot of assistance. But they produce high quality beef. So Angus cattle, the black-hatted cattle, which are right over here behind Cat, these black-hatted cattle have been important because of the marbling of their meat, which is very desirable in the American consumer market. So if we can crossbreed an Angus cattle and keep that marbling with another breed, then we get some really cool things going on. So this is where some interesting breeds start happening. One of the interesting breeds is the Santa Gertrudis, which is a great mix of the Zebu cow with Angus. So you are trying to get something amazing there. And that's in the Houston area of Texas, which is the most tropical part of our state. And that's changed over time. This guy is from the 1870s, but then you see in the 1950s, for some reason, everyone thought that it was best to encourage the dwarfism gene that happened in Hereford cattle. And suddenly these miniature Herefords, this is actually life size, were really popular, but they almost wiped out a good Hereford genetics and worked really hard to reverse that. In fact, in the 1970s, the frame race began in the cattle industry, and you ended up with giant cattle. This is another life-size model, and you can see
6 feet tall at his ears. This is a life-size model.
Right. This is the Charlet, and it is cute. But, too short and fat in the 50s. Breeders did a 180-degree turnaround and really did something crazy, but progress was limited as a result of bloodlines that existed in the United States, which led to the importation of European cattle breeds like Charlet, Chianina, Limousine, and Simmental. So instead of straight breeding, they also started crossbreeding here in the United States, but really it was the 1970s that saw the boom of this. Today,
I'm going to pause real quick. A couple of quick questions.
Sure.
One, how much did it, when it came to veterinary care of medicine, how much was formalized back then versus now? And I think that follows the trend of higher education in the United States, in that early on, it was mostly on-the-job training. Whereas now we, especially when you're talking about genetic crossbreeding, it's a lot more formalized. In fact, Texas Tech University is just right now in the process of opening up a veterinary school that really is going to cater to large institutions, ranches, farms, etc. And we're opening up a new veterinary school in Amarillo. Another question was about chickens. And yes, most farms kept chickens, but not in the way we kept cows. Most of the time, the matron and children of the house kept chickens around the farmhouse and used them for eggs, for chicken, for etc. All right.
All right. So just to show you guys the ideal modern cow here, or steer. This is a steer here in the United States. This is the winner of the 2018 Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. So he kind of shows this compact, beautiful, compact musculature in a breed of cow. I'm going to walk around like the main crossbred steer named Checkers. And he actually sold for the handsome price of $110,000.
I'm sorry. One cow sold for $110,000.
Yes, at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, and it was shown by a high school student, Dawson Campbell. And that funding went to fund his entire college education.
Holy cow. So yes, they absolutely can apply all of these techniques to goat ranches. And you're starting to see more goat ranches and sheep ranches, especially in more southern Texas. But that's not featured as much in this establishment because those weren't historical as much. When it came to ranches, especially early ranches in the United States, goats and sheep ranches are a newer development.
Well, and just to address cattle, so we had an abundant free resource when the Spanish came, Christopher Columbus's voyages and others, they brought Andalusian cattle with them, and they actually just set them free. And they did very, very well in the environment here in Texas. And soon there were far more livestock than there were people in the state of Texas. And one day, folks got the idea, hey, let's round up these cattle, drive them to market, and we can buy land and start a ranch. So during the 1870s, there was a mass movement to the point of pushing these cattle to extinction, these longhorn, to drive them north to Kansas, sell them, and then they would buy these English breeds and start a ranch. Charlie Goodnight, who was a rancher in the 1870s up until the early 1900s, actually started a preserve for bison and longhorn both, because we had about driven them to extinction and replaced them with imports from Europe.
Okay, so a great question, very interesting, is someone was asking about the sport of rodeos. And rodeos was less about the livestock and was more about the skill of the cowboys, of the vaqueros, in their ability to wrangle the cows. And so you'd have everything from riding competitions, roping competitions. And while a lot of people don't know this, I actually used to ride in play days when I was younger because I worked on a goat ranch.
Right, and today, a lot of cowboys that work on ranches participate in ranch rodeos where they're showing off the skills of their horses and themselves. So that's still a really popular thing that happens from cowboys that are on ranches today. And if you ever see a bored cowboy, he'll be throwing a rope.
Michael?
Actually, the state sport, the official state sport for Texas. Wow.
Hey, Michael?
Yes.
I'm not sure if this question was answered, but is the number of animals in the ranches tied to prestige, or is it purely business?
Oh, I did see that one. I forgot it. It is 100% about business. Horses, yes, there was certainly a lot of prestige. And with very expensive cow behind us, the only prestige was that was a perfect cow specimen. And so one of the reasons that cow was certainly purchased was for its stud services. But again, it was for the express purposes of getting that perfect meat that they wanted. In fact, let's come over here and look at this little section about meat. So it was really, really strictly for business and not prestige within a particular bovine law.
Right, and most cattle do not sell for that price. That is a show cow. But what they'll do is learn from the genetics of Checkers over here, and they will apply what they've learned from his genetics to larger herds. So that crossbreeding, that Maine and Jew crossbreed worked really well for meat quality.
And this is that marbling that she was discussing earlier. Because that fat, when cooked, just
juicy,
very tasty. Okay, we are out of official time. So if any of you need to go ahead and log off, we understand. Again, we'll make a recording of this available. And we'll also talk to them about some resources if they have any other pre-recorded tours. And we'll try to make those available as well. So if you have to log off, understand. I may go ahead and keep walking through some of the indoor areas. And if you have additional questions, please feel free to ask. So but we are now moving into the optional portion of the tour. Oh, perfect. So Kat just told me that Julie has some virtual tours from Christmas that Kat is going to make available on.
As far as a tool that was really long guns, like this double barrel shotgun, and this Winchester rifle were the staples in everyone's home. Shotguns especially, because you could stuff whatever you wanted to in there to be your book that we house here at the National Ranching Heritage Center. And these are what our curators chose to put on exhibit here in the Macy Gallery.
So I mentioned that I used to work on a goat ranch, and in West Texas. That was its sole purpose. Now, you could certainly scare a coyote if the coyote was attacking the kids, the small goats, baby goats, but its main purpose was protection against snakes. Maria, how many people do we still have with us?
Looks like everybody that was on the call.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic.
Snakes, are they shot?
Yes.
Yes.
Pretty much any way we can get rid of snakes, we do. When it comes to those rattlesnakes, we don't have any problems with grass snakes, king snakes. They serve a valuable service to the ecosystem in that they help keep down the population of rodents, varmints, etc. However, rattlesnakes are incredibly venomous, and that is the most common venomous snake in this area. And one of the problems that we see even today is that, and I'm going to look to Julie to correct me if I'm wrong, but we're seeing more and more rattlesnakes that don't rattle to announce their presence. Oh, that scares Kat. No, it's totally not true, Kat. Sorry. It's true.
I haven't seen scientific evidence yet, but you are hearing folks talk about rattlesnakes without rattlers.
A lot of anecdotal evidence. So not scientifically based, but a lot of telling of stories from people who work on ranches of, hey, I'm seeing more rattlesnakes that don't rattle before to announce their presence. It is just rude.
Well, it's funny that you're talking. I actually got an email from a friend this morning to talk about an experience he had with a rattlesnake. Most ranches around here, there is a hoe, like a hoe for hoeing or tilling a field, kept on the back porch so that you can, chop off the head of a rattlesnake. That's how most ranchers that I know pay. I got this morning, he was reporting how the snake's head still had the ability to strike and actually bit him after the snake was decapitated. So typically when this particular rancher kills a rattlesnake, he removes the head and buries the head to keep his dogs from getting a hold of it and accidentally getting poisoned. This one, he let it to close after being decapitated to his hand, and it struck his finger. And ranches here are so remote, it was a 45-minute drive to the ER. So an interesting fact that he emailed me this morning to tell me that story, and we're asking about rattlesnakes today. So definitely something that is a daily thing on ranches in this part of the world.
Okay, so a couple questions. One, are rattlesnakes commonly eaten? Commonly, I think, is the word that we would focus on here. There are annual rattlesnake roundups. In fact, there is one in Sweetwater, Texas, which is about 2 hours from here. I went there once. It happened to be going on when my family was going through. So we thought, okay, let's try this out. It was not good. And you don't typically go into a store and see rattlesnake meat of any kind. It's tough, it's gristly, it's not good. The other question I saw was, are there programs to help ranches remain profitable? Julie, do you know anything about that?
Well, as far as programs, there are lots of programs that try to help ranches out. A lot of ranches diversify their boom and bust some years. It depends on the rain. If we have great rain and grass for the cattle, we make a great profit. If we go into a drought and have to sell cattle off early, we lose funding. So it takes a wise business manager, a little luck, and the right amount of rain at the right time. So ranching's a tough business to be in. And, you know, a lot of pioneers when they came out failed at ranching. And in this part of Texas, here in the Panhandle, right around Lubbock, they gave up on that and started farming because it was more of a sure thing and it required less land for the same amount of profit. Government programs are offered. Government programs are offered, you know, by way of help in grass grazing management, sustainability management on grasslands through the the Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS. And of course, there are cattle markets that play a big role in the price of beef and livestock, and anything in the market. You know, is an interesting thing. But as far as official program,
Okay. All right, we're going to move this way. As promised, one of the things I wanted to show you is just across the street, still part of the property. They have this beautiful, I don't know what you call it, park. It's Gibson Park, but it's got some beautiful statuary here. Now, as I was saying, I actually work very, very nearby. And we will often come walk through this area on a daily walk. And so we see everything from lots of birds to prairie dogs, and we'll often see jackrabbits, which have very, very long perked ears running through this area. And as you can see,
so these are all sculptures of the longhorn cattle, those what resulted of the wild Andalusian cattle in Texas that were original domesticated animals brought from Spain that got wild again and then were domesticated, but they had a chance to adapt to the environment. They had these huge longhorns, which made them difficult to work with. They do not have the best temperament, but these are what founded the ranching industry in North America, were the wild longhorn cattle.
in fact, the Longhorn steer is the school mascot of University of Texas. But there is something about the rattler that just rattles me.
You know, when I'm on a ranch, the thing that bothers me the most are fire ants.
Ooh. Okay, so this is a desert willow, correct? I think? Okay.
Yes.
So this is a very drought-tolerant tree or bush, and I just happen to love this tree. And so you'll see a lot of these in the area. You'll see the multiple trunk system, and that helps them. Instead of a large, massive trunk that requires a lot more water, they have smaller, diversified trunk systems that require less water.
Well, and actually, all of the plants that you're seeing here are native. Yes. So there are leafcutter bees and several other varieties. There's a tiny bee in here, and they actually depend on this prickly pear cactus to gather pollen.
I'm a huge, huge, huge fan of bees. Not wasps, not hornets, but bees. I love bees. Okay. So as you can see, this land goes out a ways. It is very beautiful. It is very picturesque. You can see why we like to walk through it. I just kind of wanted to give you an idea of the cattle. And I wanted to walk over here. Is the PK one of the brands?
Yeah.
All right. So I just wanted to give you a quick example. Even on the statuary, they included one of those brands. And you've probably seen them before, but I just wanted to give you a sort of a close-up view. Normally it's back here, right? And normally the brand is back here, right? Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. You mentioned rabbits. Oh, I missed the question. Can you read that question again, Maria? Rabbits would want you or something?
Which, I don't think there was a last question. The last thing mentioned was rabbits have long ears, and they were just saying they pictured Bugs Bunny from Looney Tunes.
There are lots of rabbits with soft, like what they call lop ears, that the rabbits are the ears are soft, but jackrabbits, while they can lay down, they needed those ears to be able to hear better. And so they would perk up and hear for a long way. All right. I think this is a great place to stop. Thank you so much for your questions, for your attendance, for your enthusiasm. Again, we're going to provide some recorded, pre-recorded, professionally done tours to make things a little better for you. And I know we have another live stream at the food bank.
We lost connection, so thank you all so much for joining. We will look forward to the next one and hopefully have better reception for the video and for the live. Okay, so we'll make some adjustments. But thank you all, and you have a great evening.
Thank you.